Picture this: a 1973 Washington quarter slipping through modern hands, hiding echoes of political unrest and quiet economic fear, its worn edges whispering stories of power and change. A 1944 Lincoln penny enters the frame, born in wartime America when every coin felt heavier because the world itself was holding its breath. Then comes the 1936 British penny, darkened by time, forged in an empire standing on the edge of history, carrying the weight of kings, colonies, and coming conflict. 3 coins, 3 nations, 3 moments when the future was uncertain and metal became memory. They traveled through pockets, wars, markets, and forgotten drawers, watching generations rise and fall. Each scratch is a scar, each stain a silent witness. The quarter remembers protests and promises. The penny remembers sacrifice and survival. The British coin remembers fading glory. Together, they form a secret timeline no textbook ever wrote. What if these ordinary coins were never ordinary at all? What if they were chosen to survive while millions vanished? Their silence is louder than words, their age more powerful than gold. Collectors see value, but history sees truth. Hold them close and you're not holding money, you're holding moments. Moments of fear, hope, and defiance pressed into metal. This is not just a collection, it's a warning from the past. Because every coin that survives does so for a reason. And once you hear their story, you'll never look at loose change the same way again. The story of the Washington $quarter 1973 begins many decades before the coin was actually minted, because its design history is deeply rooted in the early 20th century, when the United States sought to honor the nation's first president, George Washington, with a circulating coin. The Washington quarter was first introduced in 1932 to commemorate the 200th anniversary of Washington's birth, and although the original plan was to use the design for just 1 year, the coin became so popular that it replaced the standing Liberty quarter permanently. By the time 1973 arrived, the Washington quarter had already established itself as one of the most recognizable circulating coins in American history, and it continued to reflect the evolution of American coinage politics, economics, and minting technology. The year 1973 is especially interesting because it sits in a period of major transformation for the United States Mint. Only 8 years earlier, in 1965, America had ended the production of silver quarters and replaced them with clad copper-nickel compositions in response to rising silver prices and widespread coin hoarding. By 1973, the clad quarter was still considered relatively new, and many collectors were paying close attention to the quality of the strikes. The performance of the new planchets and the overall appearance of the coins produced at the Philadelphia and Denver mints. The clad composition featured an outer layer of copper-nickel bonded to a pure copper core, and although it lacked the luster and weight of the earlier silver issues, it demonstrated better durability for modern circulation needs. On the obverse side, the 1973 Washington quarter continued using the famous portrait of George Washington, designed by sculptor John Flanagan, whose design was selected from a group of submissions in 1931. The portrait shows Washington facing left with the word "Liberty" above his head and the motto, "In God We Trust," to the left. The date appears at the bottom, and for 1973, the font and position remained consistent with the post-1965 design standard. Flanagan's portrait had experienced many subtle modifications over the decades, and by 1973, additional refinements had been made to accommodate modern minting technology and improve strike clarity, especially in the hair details and the lower neckline. The reverse design of the 1973 quarter features a heraldic eagle with wings spread clutching a bundle of arrows and an olive branch symbolizing both the strength and desire for peace that define the American spirit. The design includes the words United States of America and E pluribus unum above the eagle and the denomination $quarter below. Although this reverse design remained consistent for many years, experts often observe that the details and sharpness of the eagle vary notably from one mint to another and from one year to another depending on die wear and production pressure. The 1973 issues reflect the typical characteristics of early 1970s clad quarters, which often show slightly weaker strikes, particularly in the eagle's feathers. 3 minting facilities were involved in the production of Washington quarters during the early 1970s, but for 1973 only 2 mints produced regular circulation strikes. The Philadelphia Mint struck coins without a mint mark, while the Denver Mint produced coins with the D mint mark, placed to the right of the ribbon under the eagle on the reverse. The San Francisco Mint also made 1973 quarters, but exclusively as proof coins intended for collectors and not for general circulation. These proof coins bear the S mint mark and are struck with polished dies on specially prepared planchets, delivering a stunning mirror-like finish that contrasts sharply with frosted design features. The Philadelphia minted 1973 quarter is widely available today because millions were produced, but collectors often note that finding examples with sharp strikes in uncirculated condition can be a challenge due to the heavy use of dies and high-speed production. The Denver Mint produced an even larger number of 1973 D quarters, and these coins are generally more sharply struck than their Philadelphia counterparts, but they also suffer from common contact marks because of their high mintage and massive distribution. High-grade Denver examples are easier to locate, but securing a flawless specimen requires patience and careful inspection. The 1973 S proof quarter is highly regarded among collectors for its clarity, sharpness, and overall visual appeal. These proofs were sold in sets to collectors and were never intended for everyday use. The cameo and deep cameo varieties are particularly prized because the contrast between frosted devices and mirrored fields is especially strong for this year, making them attractive display pieces. The process of creating these proofs required multiple strikes and meticulous die preparation, resulting in sharply defined details that stand out far more clearly than those on circulation strikes. Economically, the early 1970s were a complicated time for the United States, with inflation, rising energy issues growing, and the aftermath of the 1965 Coinage Act still influencing decisions at the Mint. Because the Mint was focused on creating reliable high-volume coinage for a growing population, the priority during 1973 was producing durable, practical quarters rather than experimenting with new compositions or designs. The clad quarter remained the most cost-effective solution, and by 1973, the public had fully accepted the new weight and appearance of clad coinage. Collectors today value the 1973 Washington quarter mostly for its historical context rather than rarity, because the year does not contain major errors or intentional variations. However, minor die varieties can be found, including double die obverse or reverse examples, weakly struck eagle's die cracks, and off-center strikes, though these are usually scarce and command attention mainly among specialist collectors. The overall value of a 1973 quarter in circulated condition remains low because so many were produced, but uncirculated and proof examples, especially those with exceptional luster or cameo contrast, often achieve strong premiums. The Washington quarter of 1973 represents a bridge between the early classic era of American silver coinage and the fully modern age of clad circulation coinage. It serves as a reminder of the changes that took place within the Mint and the broader economy and reflects the nation's continued respect for George Washington, whose image has appeared on the quarter for more than 90 years. Whether examined by a historian, a numismatist, or a casual collector, the 1973 quarter stands as a fascinating piece of American monetary history and continues to circulate today as a symbol of national identity, tradition, and the evolution of American currency. The Washington quarter dollar of 1973 gains even more depth when viewed within the broader historical timeline of American coin production during a period when the United States Mint was undergoing steady modernization. The early 1970s marked a transitional era for American coinage policy because the Mint was moving away from traditional craftsmanship and embracing high speed, fully mechanized systems that could produce hundreds of millions of coins each month. This shift deeply affected the character of coins like the 1973 quarter because the tools, dies, and planchets used in its production were part of these updated systems which prioritized quantity and uniformity over artistic sharpness. As a result, many 1973 quarters show the typical circulation strike softness that is characteristic of the early clad era, where the metal composition and minting techniques were still being refined to create the best possible results for the public. To further understand the 1973 quarter, one must consider how the nation's economy influenced its mintage levels and distribution patterns. The United States in the early 1970s faced inflationary pressures and shifts in consumer behavior, which drove increased demand for circulating coinage. Businesses, banks, and retail industries required stable coin supplies to keep cash flow systems running smoothly. In response, the Mint allocated considerable resources to quarter production because the 25-cent denomination was one of the most heavily used coins in commerce, especially for vending machines, parking meters, laundromats, and public transport systems. This high demand explains why the Philadelphia and Denver mints produced hundreds of millions of 1973 quarters, despite the absence of any commemorative purpose or special events tied to the year. Another important aspect of the 1973 Washington quarter's story involves the gradual decline of silver coin hoarding, which had soared in the 1960s. Even though circulating quarters had not contained silver since 1965, many Americans continued storing older silver quarters long after the transition because of the belief that precious metal-based currency was inherently more valuable and stable. The year 1944 holds a very special place in the long and fascinating history of the wheat penny. The Lincoln Wheat Penny series began in 1909 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, and it continued through 1958, featuring the famous wheat ears design on the reverse. But among all the years of production, the 1944 wheat penny stands out not only for its massive mintage, but also for the stories that surround it. This coin tells a tale that combines American history, World War II economy, and minting innovation all together in one small piece of copper. In 1944, the United States was still deeply involved in World War II, and this had a direct impact on the materials used for coinage. During the war, copper was a vital resource needed for ammunition shell casings and military equipment. As a result, in 1943, the U.S. Mint experimented by making pennies out of zinc-coated steel instead of copper. However, those 1943 steel cents rusted easily and were unpopular with the public by 1944. The Mint decided to return to a copper-based composition, but with a twist. Instead of using newly mined copper, they used recycled materials primarily from spent shell casings collected from military training grounds. This act symbolized America's wartime resourcefulness, turning instruments of war back into coins for peace. The 1944 wheat penny was produced at 3 mints, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Each mint left its mark in history. The Philadelphia Mint produced the most coins with no mint mark. The Denver Mint marked its coins with a small D under the date, and San Francisco with an S. The total mintage for 1944 exceeded 1.5 billion coins, making it one of the most common wheat pennies ever struck yet. Despite its abundance, the coin holds immense sentimental and historical value for collectors because of its wartime origin. The composition of the 1944 penny was roughly 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc. This gave it a distinct reddish-brown hue that has remained attractive to collectors even decades later because of the recycled metal. Many of these coins developed unique toning patterns over time, giving each piece a slightly different look and feel in some cases. You can even find coins that appear more yellow or darker than typical wheat cents from other years. This is one reason why collectors love searching through 1944 pennies for interesting variations. One of the most fascinating stories connected to the 1944 penny is the accidental creation of the 1944 steel cent. A few leftover steel planchets from 1943 somehow got mixed in during the 1944 production run, resulting in a few steel pennies with the 1944 date. These are among the rarest coins in all of U.S. numismatics. Fewer than 30 are believed to exist across all mints. A genuine 1944 steel penny can sell for tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. Depending on its condition, many forgeries exist, so authentication by an expert or grading service is crucial. In addition to the steel cent error, there are also famous double die varieties and repunched mint marks known among collectors. For example, the 1944 D over S. Mint mark variety shows signs of a San Francisco S. Mint mark struck first and then overpunched by a D. This likely happened due to a transitional error when minting dies were reassigned from one facility to another. Small details like this make coin hunting exciting because they reveal the human side of minting mistakes and historical processes that occurred under intense wartime pressure. Throughout the decades, the 1944 wheat penny has come to represent more than just a piece of currency. It is a symbol of resilience during one of the most challenging times in American history. Every coin minted that year carries a story of soldiers abroad, citizens recycling metal for the war effort, and a nation determined to prevail against hardship. It circulated through countless hands, from factory workers to farmers, from soldiers returning home to children saving pennies for the future. The design of the wheat penny remained unchanged that year, featuring the classic portrait of Abraham Lincoln designed by Victor David Brenner. On the obverse side, Brenner's initials VDB, which had caused controversy in 1909, were still absent from the coin in 1944, only to return in later years. On the reverse, two stylized wheat ears frame the words 1 cent and United States of America, symbolizing abundance, prosperity, and growth after years of economic depression and war. The simple yet powerful imagery connected citizens with the ideals of unity and renewal. Over time, as silver and gold coins were gradually withdrawn from circulation, the humble wheat penny remained a constant companion for generations of Americans. By the time the design changed in 1959 to the Lincoln Memorial reverse, millions of 1944 wheat cents were already tucked away by collectors who recognized their special place in history. Today, these coins can still be found in old jars, drawers, and family heirlooms. They are often one of the first coins new collectors discover, which makes them a gateway into the fascinating world of numismatics. For a YouTube audience, the story of the 1944 wheat penny can unfold over time. By diving deeper into the historical context, you could explore how wartime production affected every aspect of American life and connect the coin's composition to the broader story of resource management during World War II. You can discuss how coin shortages influenced daily transactions and how the American public reacted when they noticed changes in their small change. People often hoarded coins believing they might become rare or valuable, and in many ways, their instinct was right. As the video continues, you can explore how the 1944 penny traveled through post-war America. It became part of paychecks during the economic recovery years. It clinked in the pockets of factory workers and school children, and it symbolized a new beginning. When the war ended, every coin tells a small part of that shared national story. And collectors today keep those stories alive each time they study or trade these historic pieces. You can also dedicate segments to the technical aspects of minting, such as how the planchets were prepared, how dies were engraved, and how the wartime pressures caused mints to operate around the clock, producing billions of coins with remarkable consistency. The craftsmanship of mint workers during that era is often underappreciated, yet without their dedication, the U.S. Mint could not have met the demand for circulating coins in a growing economy. Another interesting part of the 2-hour video could focus on real collector stories showing how people found rare errors or preserved rolls of uncirculated 1944 wheat cents for decades. You could feature grading examples from PCGS or NGC to help viewers understand how condition affects value. Mint state coins with bright luster are still sought after today, especially from the Denver and San Francisco mints. Some collectors even specialize only in wartime Lincoln cents from 1941 to 1945, which form a historically rich subset within the series. The story of the British 1936 penny begins long before the year itself, because the coin belongs to one of the most eventful and dramatic periods in modern British history. The penny had been a central part of British currency for centuries, and by the time 1936 arrived, it had already gone through a long evolution in design, metal composition, and national meaning. The penny was a coin that ordinary people used every day in markets, shops, trams, and daily life, so its history is also the story of British society and the monarchs who ruled over it. In 1936, the British Empire was still one of the largest global powers stretching across continents and shaping world trade culture and politics. The penny of this year reflects the tail end of the long reign of King George V, who had ruled since 1910. George V guided the nation through the First World War and into an era of great change, including the birth of modern communication, the growth of industry, and the shifting politics of Europe. By 1936, his portrait had become familiar on coins and banknotes across the empire. The portrait on the 1936 penny shows George V facing left with a dignified expression reflecting the tradition of alternating monarch profiles with each new reign. The inscription around the portrait translates to George V by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, Defender of the Faith and Emperor of India. The reverse of the coin features Britannia, a symbol of strength, unity, and protection. She appears seated with a shield and trident, watching over the seas that connected the empire. The image had been used on pennies since the 17th century, and by 1936, it had become one of the most iconic images in British numismatics. The design represents stability, tradition, and national pride, something especially important during an era when economic difficulties and political tensions were rising across Europe. The year 1936 is also remembered as the Year of the Three Kings because Britain saw 3 monarchs in a single year. George V died in January 1936, which meant that coins dated 1936 were struck shortly before and shortly after his passing. However, no British pennies were produced with the portrait of Edward VIII, who succeeded George V but quickly abdicated due to his wish to marry Wallis Simpson, a situation that shocked the empire and forced him to relinquish the crown. Since Edward VIII abdicated so quickly and before full coin production began, his pennies never entered circulation. This makes the 1936 penny one of the last circulating pennies of the George V era and symbolically the final chapter of a long and influential reign. Production of the 1936 penny took place at the Royal Mint, using bronze alloy consisting of copper, tin, and zinc. The minting process involved preparing planchets, heating them, pressing them through dies, and inspecting them for quality. The Royal Mint in this period had developed strong industrial precision, allowing millions of pennies to be minted each year. The 1936 penny was produced in large numbers and therefore is not rare from a mintage standpoint, but its historical significance has made it highly popular among numismatists. Collectors also pay attention to small variations in the 1936 penny, including differences in strike sharpness, color toning, metal wear, and die characteristics. Over time, these differences can result from circulation conditions, storage methods, or environmental exposure. While most 1936 pennies were used heavily in daily commerce, some were preserved with care, which makes high-grade examples more valuable today. Well-preserved coins show clear lines in Britannia's, shield crisp lettering on both sides, and minimal surface wear. By the mid-1930s, the British economy was recovering from the Great Depression, and coins like the 1936 penny played a central role in purchasing basic goods such as bread, tea, clothing, and transport. The penny had strong buying power in these years, and its presence in pockets and purses across the country made it a familiar symbol of everyday life. Workers paid their bus fare with pennies, children bought sweets with them, and markets operated with transactions built around piles of pennies. This everyday usage gives the 1936 penny a cultural history that extends beyond royal portraits. The political world around the 1936 penny was shifting as international tensions rose, and the threat of conflict in Europe grew. With the rise of militarism in Germany, Italy, and other nations, Britain was preparing for potential changes that would eventually lead to the outbreak of the Second World War just 3 years later. The 1936 penny, therefore, stands at the edge of a major turning point representing the last phase of pre-war Britain, with its traditions still intact and its society not yet deeply affected by wartime rationing and industrial redirection. From a numismatic perspective, the 1936 penny marks the end of an artistic and stylistic era. The design of Britannia, which had remained largely unchanged since the Victorian era, would soon be replaced with new imagery as the monarchy transitioned and global events reshaped the nation. Coins, bearing the portrait of George VI, who followed Edward VIII, introduced a fresh era, but the 1936 penny remains a final reminder of the George V legacy. The coin carries with it the weight of an empire, nearing its zenith, yet also approaching a period of dramatic transformation. For YouTube viewers, a 2-hour documentary about the 1936 penny can explore deeper themes, including the life and reign of George V, the political consequences of Edward VIII's abdication, the minting traditions of the Royal Mint, the social life of working-class Britain in the 1930s, and how coins can tell the story of national identity. The documentary can follow the journey of the penny from design stage to production and then into circulation, where it passed through thousands of hands, each time being part of an everyday exchange. Its worn surfaces today reflect that long journey. Another important aspect is the transition of the British monetary system, which continued to evolve in the following decades, leading to decimalization in 1971. The 1936 penny belongs to the pre-decimal system, which functioned for centuries with pounds, shillings, and pence. Understanding the place of the 1936 penny within this system helps viewers understand British economic history, as well as the lives of ordinary people before modern currency forms replaced older denominations. The legacy of the 1936 penny remains strong among collectors, teachers, historians, and enthusiasts of British culture. The coin tells a story, not only of kings and political events, but also of factories, markets, railways, ships, soldiers, school children, and the countless citizens who used the penny every day. Its bronze surface holds the echoes of a country standing between tradition and transformation, between the stability of a long-reigning monarch and the uncertainty of a rapidly changing world.